Bangkok, 1958. The stifling heat of Rajadamnern Stadium hung heavy over the crowd. In the center of the ring stood Siara, known as the Scorpion, an undefeated Muay Thai champion who had already knocked out 7 men that evening. The fight promoter announced a prize of 10,000 baht to anyone who could last 3 rounds against her. The crowd was in a frenzy, believing Muay Thai to be the greatest art on the planet. Suddenly, a tall, athletic black youth stepped out of the shadows. This was 17-year-old Cassius Clay. He had no trainer here, no reputation, only a pair of boxing gloves and absolute confidence. An American boxer against a Thai killer. To the locals, this looked like a death sentence for the kid from Kentucky. The air inside the arena was thick with the scent of tobacco smoke, spicy street food, and the omnipresent sting of liniment oil. Thousands of eyes shifted from the lethal woman in the ring to the stranger who dared to climb through the ropes. He moved with a grace that was alien to the rigid, grounded stance of the traditional Thai fighters. While the local challengers had been short, stocky, and grim, this newcomer was lean, radiant, and wore a look of focused amusement rather than fear. The promoter gestured toward the teenager, mocking his lack of traditional gear, but Clay simply bounced on the balls of his feet, testing the spring of the blood-stained canvas. The spectators laughed, placing bets on how many seconds it would take for the Scorpion to shatter his ribs with a roundhouse kick. They saw a boy far from home, out of his element and overmatched by the brutal reality of 8-limbed combat. They did not see the Olympic-level speed or the revolutionary footwork that was already beginning to take shape in his mind. Siara watched him with clinical indifference, her shins hardened by years of striking timber and her elbows sharpened by dozens of professional wars. She saw just another victim, another foreigner who misunderstood the violence of Bangkok. Clay ignored the jeers and the odds stacked against him. He didn't need a cornerman to tell him what he was up against. He had spent his life proving people wrong on the streets of Louisville, and the humid air of Thailand felt no different than the pressure of a championship bout. As he tightened the laces of his gloves, the stadium lights caught the sweat on his brow, turning him into a silhouette of pure defiance. He was a long way from the bluegrass state, standing in a den of lions, but he carried the aura of a man who already knew he was the greatest. The bell was about to ring, and the world was about to find out that the American boxer wasn't there to survive. He was there to change the game forever. The gong sounded. Clay began to do what had never been seen in Bangkok. He danced. Siara tried to apply the classic tactics of Muay Thai, crushing low kicks to the legs to strip him of his mobility. But Clay was incredibly fast. He moved off the line of attack by millimeters, forcing her to strike into empty space. However, the ring was smaller than what he was used to, and the rules allowed elbows and knees. Clay took a powerful elbow strike to the jaw that nearly knocked him off his feet. The stadium exploded. He realized that here, one could not just box. Here, one had to survive. The impact of the blow sent a jarring shock through his entire frame, the metallic taste of blood immediately filling his mouth as his vision blurred for a fraction of a second. The roar of the Thai crowd was deafening, a wall of sound celebrating the first sign of his vulnerability. Siara did not hesitate, sensing the opening and pressing forward with a relentless barrage of strikes that utilized every limb as a weapon. She threw a high roundhouse kick aimed at his temple, but Clay leaned back just enough to feel the wind of the shin bone pass his nose. He was trapped in a box of violence, where the angles were sharper and the threats came from directions his muscle memory did not yet recognize. Every time he tried to establish his rhythm, a stinging kick caught the outside of his thigh, sending a wave of fire through his nerves. The Scorpion was methodical, cutting off the ring and forcing the dancer into the corners where his footwork was neutralized. Clay felt the ropes against his back, a cold realization sinking in that the vast distances of a boxing ring were a luxury he no longer possessed. He had to adapt his defense, tucking his chin deeper and raising his guard to protect against the rising knees that threatened to shatter his ribs. The heat was an enemy of its own, thick and suffocating, making every breath a labor as he circled away from her power side. He watched her eyes, searching for the telltale flicker of intent before she launched her next assault. His heart hammered against his chest, not with the rhythm of fear, but with the frantic beat of a predator realizing he was in a different kind of jungle. He feinted a jab, but Siara countered with a spinning back elbow that grazed his forehead, opening a thin red line that began to leak heat down his face. The spectators were on their feet, screaming for the finish, certain that the Americans' flashy style was about to be dismantled by the brutal efficiency of their national sport. Clay adjusted his stance, narrowing his base and keeping his hands higher than usual, his mind working at lightning speed to decode the timing of her kicks. He was no longer just a visitor in a foreign land. He was a student of pain, learning in real time that every movement had a price. The survival instinct that had carried him through the toughest gyms in America surged to the surface, sharpening his focus until the chaos of the stadium faded into a distant hum, leaving only the sound of his own breathing and the deadly scrape of the scorpion's feet on the canvas. The second round. Siara moved into the plum, the deadly Thai clinch. She gripped Clay's neck to drive her knees into his body. Clay, having never encountered stand-up grappling, utilized his physical strength and footwork. Instead of backing away, he sharply closed the distance, stripping her of her momentum, and began working short uppercuts to the body, knocking the breath out of her. At one moment, he found a gap and threw his signature jab. His fist froze a millimeter from her nose. Clay did not strike. He showed that he had read her. The hall went silent. Siara saw in his eyes not fear, but a calculating genius. The sudden stillness in the arena was heavy with the realization that the match had shifted from a slaughter to a chess game. Clay's hands, usually loose and flickering, were now precise instruments of control as he felt the tension in her arms and anticipated the direction of her next move. The crowd watched in stunned disbelief as the American teenager used his superior reach not to keep her away, but to jam her internal rhythm. Every time she attempted to reset her stance, Clay was already there, hovering in her space like a ghost that refused to be caught. The psychological weight of that withheld punch hung in the humid air, more damaging than a physical blow could ever be. It was a message of absolute dominance and unexpected mercy that rattled the scorpion's legendary composure. She had spent her life breaking the will of warriors who fought with desperation, but she had no defense against a man who fought with such terrifying clarity. Clay shifted his weight, his feet sliding over the canvas with a hushed friction that signaled a change in his strategy. He began to manipulate the angles of the ring, turning the smaller space to his advantage by forcing her into movements she hadn't planned. The sheer speed of his reflexes allowed him to parry her strikes with the casual ease of a man swatting away flies, all while maintaining a gaze that dissected her every habit. He noticed the slight dip of her shoulder before a kick, and the way her breathing hitched before a clinch attempt. He was no longer just reacting. He was dictating the very flow of time within the ropes. The trainers in the front row leaned forward, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and awe as they witnessed a boxing prodigy deconstruct a national champion's entire system in a matter of minutes. The air grew even thicker as the heat of the battle reached its peak, yet Clay looked cooler than he had at the start, his movements becoming more fluid as he found the perfect harmony between his boxing roots and the chaotic requirements of the Bangkok ring. The silence of the audience was not one of boredom, but of profound respect for a level of mastery that transcended language and borders. Siara felt her own heart racing, not from exhaustion, but from the thrill of finally meeting an equal who could see the world through the same lens of combat perfection. The third round turned into a technical duel. They were no longer trying to kill each other, they were testing the limits of their skill. Clay adapted to her kicks, using his elbows for protection, while Siara began to use deceptive feints to catch him on the counterattack. When the final gong sounded, Clay was still on his feet. The crowd, which at the beginning had wanted his blood, now gave a standing ovation. The 10,000 baht no longer mattered. Siara approached Clay and performed a traditional bow, a Y. The American, breathing heavily, responded in kind. The atmosphere in the stadium had shifted from one of predatory hunger to a rare, reverent stillness that transcended the violence of the sport. Every spectator realized they had witnessed something far more valuable than a mere knockout. Clay stood tall, his chest heaving under the weight of the humid air, sweat pouring down his back in rivers, yet his spirit remained unbroken and vibrant. He watched as the Scorpion lowered her guard completely, her face softening from the mask of a killer into the expression of a true martial artist who had found a mirror of her own greatness. The thousands of voices that had previously screamed for his destruction were now chanting in a rhythm of shared admiration, acknowledging the foreign boy who had survived the fire of the most dangerous ring in Asia. Clay felt the stinging pain in his ribs and the dull throb in his jaw, but these sensations were secondary to the profound sense of connection he felt with the woman standing before him. They had communicated through the language of bone and muscle, a dialogue that required no translation and left no room for lies. The money offered by the promoters sat forgotten in a metal box, rendered insignificant by the exchange of energy that had just occurred on the blood-stained canvas. Clay looked around the arena, seeing the scarred faces of old trainers and the wide eyes of young fighters, all of them united by the realization that boxing and Muay Thai were not enemies, but different paths to the same mountain peak. The American teenager had come to Bangkok to prove his worth to the world, but he had discovered something deeper, a brotherhood of warriors that spanned the globe. As he stood there, returning the bow with a sincerity that surprised even himself, he realized that his journey was no longer just about becoming a champion, but about absorbing every lesson the world had to offer. The sweat on his brow felt like a baptism into a new world of combat, one where respect was the ultimate currency and every bruise was a mark of growth. The lights of Rajadamnern Stadium seemed to shine brighter in that moment, illuminating a path that led far beyond the borders of Kentucky or the streets of Bangkok, into the timeless history of legends. After the fight, Clay did not leave Bangkok immediately. The next 3 days they spent in Siara's old gym, without cameras or spectators. She taught him elbow work and defense against kicks, skills that would later make his heavyweight defense practically impenetrable. He taught her his unique footwork and the psychology of intimidating an opponent. In 1958 in Bangkok, the world saw the birth of a style that would later be called the greatest. Muhammad Ali left Thailand, taking with him not only money, but the secrets of the East that would change the history of boxing forever. The gym was a sanctuary of peeling paint and rusted corrugated iron, tucked away in a labyrinthine alley with a smell of jasmine incense mingled with the salt of old sweat. Away from the roar of the stadium, their exchange became a silent, rhythmic ritual of motion and countermotion. Siara demonstrated how to turn the hip into a blade, showing Clay how a short, diagonal elbow could parry a heavy punch and slash an opening simultaneously. She guided his forearms into the proper cross-block positions, teaching the American how to check low kicks with the shin rather than absorbing the impact with soft muscle. Clay soaked up the geometry of Thai striking, realizing that his boxing guard could be adapted into a cage of bone and leather. In return, the Kentucky native transformed the dusty floor into a stage of perpetual motion. He showed the Scorpion how to glide on the balls of her feet, using the Ali shuffle not just as a flourish, but as a tool to disrupt a fighter's depth perception. He whispered through movement the art of the psychological war, how a dropped hand, a mocking smile, or a sudden burst of speed could shatter a rival's confidence before the first punch was ever landed. As they sparred in the dim afternoon light, the boundaries between their disciplines dissolved. Clay's boxing became more versatile, gaining the structural toughness of the East, while Siara's Muay Thai gained the elusive, lightning-fast fluidity of the West. By the final evening, the young man stood at the edge of the Chao Phraya River, looking out at the city that had tested his soul. He was no longer just a talented amateur from Louisville. He was a global warrior who had integrated the brutality of the jungle into the science of the ring. When he finally boarded his flight, he carried a notebook filled with mental sketches of Thai clinches and a heart hardened by the respect of a master. The world would soon see a man who danced like a butterfly but possessed the hidden, stinging defense of a scorpion, a fusion born in the heat of a forgotten Bangkok gym that would eventually crown him as the greatest of all time.